Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my session. Very much appreciated that everyone could still make it for the last session of the day. I'm sure all of you are quite inspired by the content that you've been listening in so far today. And I'm here on the topic of equity and diversity to speak more about this very important issue. Going straight into my slides. So I am very happy to be speaking today about something that is personally very important for myself. But before going into that, I'd like to introduce myself more from a professional capacity first and foremost. So hi, everyone. My name is Andreas Pattichis. Please call me Andy. And I am a design director and partner over at Hellon. Hellon is a customer experience and innovation consultancy that is based in Helsinki and London. And that's actually where our name also is coming from. Helsinki, London, when you put it together, is Hellon. We have been around for well over 10 years, and I personally have a background within service design for over 12 years. So definitely something that I've been around for a while. But actually, I am here today to not speak about Hellon and the work we do, but something about kind of bigger as an issue and as a topic, which is, as I like to call it, the queer experience. The whole content today is really about giving you some kind of pointers to and what to watch out when you want to become more equitable towards the LGBTQ plus community. And this is all based on both my own personal experiences, but of course from a wide piece of research that was conducted. So yeah, hopefully everyone are curious to hear about these things. And yeah, if you have any questions throughout this session, please feel free to use the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your window. I will go through the session or the content first and foremost. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to note them down and put them in the tab. And then we'll definitely we'll save some time towards the end for roughly 20 minutes to make sure that I get to answer all of your questions. And of course, my email is also there available in case you wish to reach afterwards. The first thing that I wanted to touch, though, is really to talk a bit about the language. This can be quite a emotive topic and multifaceted. So I wanted to kind of align and make sure that we all, when we speak about the queer community, when we speak about customer experience, what are these things that we are talking about in the slides? Well, first and foremost, customer experience, this is still very much the space that we're focusing on, right? So when you look at the definition from Harvard Business Review, for example, it very clearly states that when we talk about customer experience, it is the internal and subjective response that customers have to any direct or indirect contact with a company. Direct contact generally occurs in the course of purchase, use, and service, and is usually initiated by the customer. All of you in this audience today, in some shape or form, you do influence the customer experience within the businesses that you work for, whether it is intentional or not. So customer experience is something that kind of evolves throughout the relationships that you have with your customers, again, regardless of whether you're working with businesses or directly with consumers. Working in this sector and in this industry of customer experience, I personally had a bit of an interesting observation throughout my career that the work that we do as customer experience professions, especially myself as a service designer, we often work around stereotypes of customers that tend to be typically heteronormative. And when we look at the queer community, it is easily dismissed from that equation. This is basically an observation that I have made myself as a queer individual myself. So I am a part of this community, working in this field for almost 12 years and beyond. It's been something that was kind of really bugging me, but I was quite quiet about it. I wouldn't really speak much of it. I just went along, but I noticed, for example, in profiling work that we did, it was very often we were talking about families and households with 2 children and a dog. and that, the couples that we were dealing with, the customers that were paired up, it was typically a man and a woman living together. The storyboards and the visualizations that we would create of different, conceptual work that we were engaged in, again, was depicted through the eyes of quite heteronormative setups. After a very long time of basically keeping quiet with this, I decided during the pandemic, this was roughly a year ago, a bit over a year ago, I wanted to really engage with my community to really see and validate almost whether this is something that I'm only observing, or is this something that is kind of bugging us, all of us within the community, and also allies and beyond the community. And interestingly enough, the topic really did cause quite a stir, at least in my networks. My posts on the topic had thousands of views. I had dozens and dozens of comments, both publicly. I received literally dozens of messages from people really validating what I thought was the case, which indeed is the fact that LGBTQ as a community, the LGBTQ plus community, is not represented in work that is dealing with the customer experience of any business, really. That opened up really kind of the door there, the opportunity to really investigate this even further and dig deeper. And roughly a year ago, this was also, or over a year ago, I engaged in a kind of a passion project of mine on the side of my day job as a director. And I started reaching out to people of the community to really listen to their experiences of how it is to be a queer person, either as a customer, but especially as a designer within the field of customer experience. This evolved even further. In addition to these interviews, I managed to speak with people from around the world, really. I was quite blessed to, there was a word of mouth. A lot of people wanted to reach out to me and talk about their experiences. Spoke to people from the Nordics, from the UK, from Brazil, from South America, from Poland, quite a wide array of different cultures. And as you can anticipate with a topic such as this one, of course, depending on the culture and how diverse a country is in itself, there were different impressions about what it means to be queer within a certain country and a certain region. I wanted to further validate some of these findings. So after that whole round of qualitative interviews, we also pushed out a survey from Hellon's side. So Hellon as an agency kind of sponsored this piece of work as well. And then we pushed out a survey again to a global community of queer individuals to really get their input and also validate some of the findings that I discovered from a smaller group of people that I interviewed. And that is where queer experience basically was born. Again, going back to the kind of definition of customer experience, the more I started engaging with the community and listening into their input and their impressions, that is where the manifestation of what I'm now abbreviating as QX came to life. And that is what I'm here to talk about today, is what are the considerations to keep in mind when you design experiences for customers in which there will be a minority who identify themselves as queer. When we say queer, what do we mean in this context? We do refer to individuals whose sexual orientation is not heterosexual or whose gender identity is not cisgender. And when we say cisgender, we mean that they do not identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. The abbreviation LGBTQIA+ refers to the words lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersexual, asexual, and beyond. And it is a quite commonly used abbreviation for the community, very oftenly shortened even further to just LGBT. But it does, the kind of definition of the community constantly evolves as we also evolve as human beings. Something that I do want to acknowledge as well is that obviously the word queer has a heavily political connotation to it. Unfortunately, we do see the word being used even as a slur in certain contexts. But I do want to completely clarify here in this room today that for the purpose of this session and for the definition of queer experience, it is really just to the individualistic expression of identity. I do not use it politically or even to kind of offend anyone. It's really to use a term to group this very significant group of people. When talking about queer experience, like I said, through the engagements that I had with the community, through the experiences that I have had as well as a queer person, it very interestingly, my first and foremost kind of observation was that a lot of change needed to happen from a customer-facing experience design side of things. Luckily, I have personally been blessed to work in communities, in workplaces that actually were diverse by default, were very open to me being myself. So I never really had any kind of issues with my employees. But the more I started speaking to people across the board from various regions and various levels of influence within their organizations, it actually became quite apparent that there are different tensions in different facets of this whole topic at hand. There are certain things to keep in mind when it comes to the community in itself. So even the queer community has certain tensions even internally. There are certain aspects to keep in mind when it comes to designing experiences, customer-facing experiences for queer individuals, but also there are things to keep in mind when we employ individuals who may or may not be queer. So, and these are the three dimensions that I will be lightly touching on in my session today. One might ask, why should I bother? Why should I think of this topic? It's a minority. I need to treat the masses and so forth. But actually, the LGBTQ plus community is bigger than what we think and has a lot of opportunity, also from a monetary perspective when we think about the business case of it. The community, according to research done by Prudential Research back in 2021, if I remember right, it has been estimated that the community at a global scale has a $3.9 trillion spending power globally, which could be equally compared to the GDP of Germany as a nation in its entirety. And Germany is a very strong community at a global scale. So you can only imagine how massive really the spending power is. And some may refer to it as the pink dollar. But yeah, it does have a lot of value from a monetary perspective. The queer community also is recognized to be, has a higher median income, so compared to heteronormative households. So queer households typically would have more disposable income than heteronormative households. And that, of course, again, means that they are potentially able to invest in other kind of ventures and services that potentially you may be offering to a wider demographic. And there is because of that, of course, it means that there's a better home equity and better financial settling for retirement. So when it comes to kind of, sustaining the loyalty of these customers and this community, it means that it will potentially go beyond their retirement age. And last but not least, the community is actually very highly educated. Over 90% of the community actually does have a high education and they are fully employed. So again, there is a lot of proof. The research after research constantly proves the point that the queer community is easily dismissed, but actually has a lot of disposable income compared to the wider demographics that we're dealing with. And very easily they get forgotten. But, there is a lot of power around this community. Something that I do want to actually, though, highlight is many businesses, of course, have realized the opportunity that lies within the community. And in the recent years, an unfortunate trend that we've been seeing with many companies doing is what we're calling rainbow washing. In the advent of social media, There's a lot of campaigns out there. Companies are trying to take advantage really of the pink dollar or the pink pound. And they have the intentions of, gaining political visibility. There's, of course, the side of business impact, business benefits. They wish to attract both the community and their allies as an audience. And by being more queer friendly in the way you present and communicate yourself as a business, you're also very easily perceived as a current and a modern business. But having said that, we have seen many instances in the last couple of years of companies where, even though they say certain things in public, what happens in the background actually is not really matching up. One company that I wish to bring as an example here is Urban Outfitters, which is a fashion retail brand. And they are actually a very vocal ally throughout their kind of seasonal collections. During the Pride Month especially, they release a massive Pride collection, fascinating, colorful designs. On social media, they really promote and push a very kind of welcoming message towards the community. But then if you investigate further and go really under the skin, we see instances where the CEO of Urban Outfitters has funded political figures who in the past have compared homosexuals to bestiality, or they have funded organizations that are actually actively trying to illegalize gay marriage in different regions around the world. So that is the perfect example of rainbow washing, where they take advantage of the community where even I am a part of, to grab a portion of that pink dollar, but actually not really doing meaningful and impactful decisions internally on where are they investing, who are they being involved with, and how do they even treat their own employees internally. So now that I'm, after setting the scene, like I said, the main purpose of this webinar today is really just to give you some very actionable recommendations and watch outs for you as business owners and beyond, on what are the sort of themes that you could be considering. And one thing to actually keep in mind is that even though in this context we're predominantly referring to the queer community, by applying some of these practices that I'm about to go through, you actually become more equitable by default, and you're able to engage with an even wider demographic of minority groups beyond the queer community, because the needs, funnily enough, are quite similar, because we're all minorities who need to be heard and need to be considered. Like I mentioned earlier, there were three key kind of bigger areas of intervention that I've identified. The first one being the kind of the queer community itself. What interventions can be done when we design experiences for customers, and again, what interventions can be done as employers for our employees to improve their experience as queer individuals. For each of these three themes, I've identified roughly 2 to 3 kind of recommendations and topics to touch on. And again, feel free to use the Q&A tab on your platform, on the Speakeasy platform, in case you have any more specific questions that you wish to ask on any of these themes. I'll start first with the design of customer experiences. So when we design experiences for our customers, what are the things that we should be keeping in mind when it comes to the community? First and foremost, one key message really to consider here is that when we talk about marginal queer communities, they are very typically and easily dismissed in research. When we talk about marginal queer communities, we basically refer to individuals who represent a hybrid of various minority identities. For example, a lesbian, a female woman who might also have certain physical disabilities. That is a marginal queer person. Unfortunately, we currently, the kind of stereotype of a queer person is a young, white male, which obviously is not a very clear, a very good representation of the community. It actually is so much more. the survey that we pushed out actually agrees very strongly with this. 63% of our respondents in the survey agreed that marginal queer communities are not considered in research. And then when you go into further studies, you can actually see here that LGBTQ people of color have actually faced much more discrimination when applying for jobs or interacting with the police. So it is kind of like these intersectionalities between different minorities is something that easily gets forgotten and definitely needs to be kept in mind. So when you do conduct research, for example, or you send out surveys, you measure customer satisfaction, ensure that there is also a representation of these communities that have certain intersectionalities between them. Second point when it comes to the design of customer experiences is really that exclusion or the sense of exclusion actually happens at the most transactional functions of a service. This happens at call centers, how people are treated, the use of pronouns even, how they are being kind of considered when you call a call center, how we gather gender data in surveys that we constantly send out to all of our customers, how we target advertising, especially within social media platforms. And all of these nuances are actually very easily missed in the practice of service design. For the ones of you in the community, in my audience today who have done service design in some shape or form, would know that very often the work that we do as service designers is very conceptual. It's very, it happens to be at sometimes very high level. It's very much about what is the vision that we should have as an organization, what are the experiences, what is the kind of happy path of a customer in the future, and so forth. And usually in those pieces of work, these intersectionalities and considerations of minority groups are actually very well considered, and I'm quite happy to see that that has evolved in the right direction. But then when it really goes to that kind of operational layer of a business on how do we talk to our people, how are emails being sent, how do we refer to people in our newsletters, we very often forget that there is more than just the two genders out there that we're talking to. One of the kind of biggest issues that I personally see is forms. So how do we gather gender data? Today, many forms have, male and female obviously is kind of the obvious ones. I'm happy to see that most forms actually currently do have that other option as well, but actually adding that other option is considered quite condescending for the community, because putting all other gender identities under one bigger umbrella and calling that other is not really inclusive enough. There are different ways of how you could gather gender data. I would encourage, for example, in Hellon, when we want to gather data without going into too many details, we would have 5 options. We would have male, female, transgender, non-binary, or undecided / do not wish to tell. So having these 5 is much more inclusive rather than just bundling everything together under one option of other. So yeah, our survey also has surfaced this. One of the participants in our survey has said in their open responses, a company needs to be aware of the wider issues and may not understand the impact of something on them, yet they think they do from their own thinking, which may not be experience-based. So yeah, it's something that is affecting all of us, and yeah, definitely something to keep in mind when you design the operational aspect of your businesses. Moving on to the second theme, which is the employee side of things. And there was actually, for me, as I said, personally, I didn't have that many negative experiences as an employer for the employers that I had in my past. But this topic came up quite a lot from other peers in my community. And there are certain interventions or considerations to keep in mind when it comes to employees. Luckily, we live today in an era where diversity and equity is something that is in certain cases and in certain markets almost a requirement by law. Unfortunately, though, we still live in a time where diversity agendas and strategies are very, very fuzzy. There's no clear indication of what are the actionable recommendations that will be done. And how does this agenda, the EDI agenda as it's usually abbreviated, how does it really manifest? How are we upskilling our employees? How are we welcoming these kind of communities within our employee base and encouraging them to really be themselves? One of the most kind of influential players in big tech is IBM. They've actually done, they're known to be one of the most vocal allies from kind of these more conventional technological corporate entities. They even have a website, I think it's called, inclusive IBM is the hashtag. So if you search that hashtag on Twitter, if you go onto the inclusive section of IBM's website, they have an entire section where they surface stories of different employees. They have perks that they try to kind of equate with their heteronormative colleagues. They're doing a lot in the space of making sure that their queer peers and colleagues are actually heard. Their survey actually has indicated that there's still many people out there. It was a staggeringly scary number of how many people actually are still scared to come out to their employees. And that's something that I'll touch slightly in a bit. But yeah, it is very important to actually have that diversity agenda because it does encourage and empower people more. The survey, again, here you can see, because of the presence of a diversity agenda, I know that I am protected by my organization when I confront colleagues' offensive and homophobic views. And even some participants have said that they would not work for an organization that does not have a vocally presented diversity agenda. I could only work for an organization that considers its impact on diversity. So yeah, it's definitely something for you to keep in mind, that if you don't have an diversity agenda, make sure to prioritize that, because that, even though it is considered as a hygiene document that you just need to have it, it actually is very empowering for any minorities, including the LGBT community. As a bridge, the next thing that I wanted to mention, and this is actually a specific nuance that many people forget, is that coming out is not actually a one-time event. Every single individual, I can also vouch for this. Yes, we have the story of coming out, of when we came out to our parents, when we came out to our family, but that is just the first of many, many times when you have to come out to your colleagues, to your clients, to your customers, to your peers. You have new people working with you. You need to come out again and again and again. There is constantly an assumption. We are all kind of wired to assume that most people around us are heterosexual or heteronormative. But yeah, and especially in the workplace, coming out is actually a moment of high anxiety and stress. You can see here a quote from one of the people that I've interviewed. I have worked in my current place of work for 7 years, and I have never felt comfortable telling my colleagues about my orientation. I work in a company full of engineers, and I feel it would affect my progression in the company considerably. This individual, personal friend of mine as well, he works in a technology and engineering company, very male dominant company. So the majority of his peers actually were males. Unfortunately, even during the interview itself, he did burst into tears because it was a realization that he didn't want to face himself. There is McKinsey and Company have conducted a research a couple of years ago. 50% of LGBTQ plus individuals are reported having to come out at work at least once a week. And from our survey, we were able to identify that 22% of the participants have not made their colleagues aware of their identity as LGBTQ plus individuals. And unfortunately, in the US, that number is almost double. It's up to 46%. These people, we exist around you, whether you acknowledge it or not. coming out is a very stressful moment. And I have worked with many people who came out to me, even to myself as a queer individual, much, much later after the engagement we had, a project or whatever actually ceased. It is a moment of high stress, and many people choose to never come out to their employers for many years. So yeah, and that's why the diversity agenda that I was mentioning earlier is so important, because when you have that document that I can actually refer to, it does empower me as an individual to actually come out and be myself within my peers. Luckily, one interesting kind of observation is that there is already some positive change already happening. So things are not as grim. Some research that has a trans employee experience survey by Total Jobs back in 2021, they conducted a second round of surveying to really see how the perception, especially towards individuals of transgender individuals, how it has evolved. I was very happy to see that one of the trends that is that there was a downwards trend of how many people have experienced discrimination from their colleagues, but it was still almost at 30% last year. So that's still a quite significant number. And also many queer individuals actually are very vocal about where they would end up working. And we see more and more people of the community who leave their jobs, who leave the environments that they're working at, when they feel that it was unwelcoming, they didn't feel comfortable being themselves at work, and so they left. We had recently, or we still are going through, the big resignation. Talent retention is a massive issue right now, and I'm sure you're also facing this yourselves as business owners. And very often, one of the reasons why someone would leave their employee is because they don't feel welcome and they don't feel that they can be themselves at work, because potentially of how they identify within the community. So there is a positive change already happening, and there is an obligation for all entrepreneurs and business owners to actually keep up with the times. The last theme and last topic that I wanted to cover is some nuances to also consider, that even within the queer community itself, there are, of course, certain tensions that we need to be aware of. First and foremost, there is still a lack of education and awareness within the community itself, and there are tensions amongst peers. The survey that we conducted also validates that. 63% of the survey would agree that there is discrimination within the LGBTQ community, and that is especially visible when it comes to transgender individuals. Unfortunately, we still do see instances where queer individuals are engaged in anti-trans activism, and it is really quite shocking, and there is still a lot of education that needs to happen. So even us within the community, there's of course lots to learn about what are the facets of the identities that we consider part of, and how can we learn from that, and of course make sure that we kind of communicate that further outside of the community to allies and other people that we engage with. But funnily enough, on the other side of the coin, the alliance between the community is the actual one constant that the community really, really requires. The Pride movement, obviously, I guess, is the most famous example. It was due to an alliance between queer individuals who got together and really kind of expressed the view that enough is enough, we cannot be discriminated against. And that started the global Pride movement that we now see everywhere, every summer. In some cases, yes, it is considered a more happy event, but in some cases, the Pride movement actually still pushes for positive change. I can see, again, interesting quotes to see here. As an older gay woman, I don't feel my part-time workplace is the correct environment. I am more interested in how the animals I work with are treated. When I was the only trans person in my team, I started speaking less about topics that mattered because it felt like preaching. The moment another LGBT individual joined the team, I felt I had someone to rely on and become more vocal, which eventually also made the output of our work better. One, again, interesting benchmark is AstraZeneca, a name that over the last couple of years has become quite famous for obvious reasons as one of the producers of the COVID vaccination. They actually have fascinating initiatives on how to again, endorse and embrace these communities and the alliance between their queer employees. AstraZeneca has this initiative called AZ Pride, AstraZeneca Pride, which is their unified global employee resource group. And they organize different types of events, educations and training. They have a campaign called This Is Me to encourage employees to share their stories. And that's how the community kind of almost organically within AstraZeneca actually forms itself. And there is an alliance internally within the company. But yeah, that all change that has all positive change that has happened in the community was mainly because of the alliance that exists within the LGBT community, and it's something that we as employers could actually be in a place to really embrace those communities and make sure that they get together and together become even better and more productive and have all the business benefits that sense of unity would actually kind of produce and entail. Of course, just to kind of conclude, before going into some questions, I see already one or two questions already appearing. There's a lot of things that you could do. And again, I understand that this can be quite overwhelming. So one could ask, like, what should I do? Where do I start? From a customer experience point of view, again, just to kind of recap some of the points, the easiest intervention actually that you could do already now is educating the audiences that you work with, especially if you are engaged in pieces of service design, kind of proposition design work. When you design any sort of visual artifact, make sure that there is an element of diversity in those visual artifacts, not only referring to queer communities, but also these intersectionalities is very good through the design of infographics, through the design of icons, storyboards that you produce, for example, to kind of narrate something, a narrative or a service. Make sure that visually you are more diverse by default. When designing the journey of your experience, the happy path, like I mentioned earlier, the phase or the stage of that customer journey that is the most critical one on how inclusive you are perceived is the onboarding journey. So obviously, if you do not have the resource to actually ensure that there is an element of inclusion throughout your end-to-end customer experience, make sure that at least your onboarding experience actually uses language that is inclusive. Because that is actually the moment when typically we do gather information about our users. What's your name? What's your email? What's your address? What's your gender? Who are your partners? What is your household setup? We ask all of these things and we do them quite almost without any clear intention. But yeah, making sure that in the onboarding journey itself, when you do gather customer data, to make sure that it is done in an inclusive manner and we use language that is not offensive and is not heteronormative, to not assume. When you conduct research of any type, especially qualitative research, it is very easy from our biased view to make assumptions that typically is driven by heteronormative norms and subconscious bias. If you're not able, for whatever reason, to reach out to a community, to a representation of the queer community, potentially reach out to a queer colleague if it's available to help you step out of that mindset. Reach out to me. happy to provide some input and some steering. There are definitely people out there who could kind of validate your bias on certain aspects, and it's always good to kind of do that sanity check, which is anyway good to make when you talk about validating certain propositions and so forth. When you recruit customers for research, so again, as Hellon, as a customer experience agency, we do conduct a lot of research. And typically what you do before conducting the research is to recruit participants in this research. especially services that actually are aimed for a considerably wide audience. For example, telecom companies, banking services, these bigger entities that typically say that their customer is basically everybody. You need to make sure that when you recruit customers for a piece of research, to aim for a diverse set of gender expressions, or even better so, marginal communities or that represent different intersectionalities, to be able to surface certain nuances and observations from the different kind of lenses that they represent. That go beyond, obviously, sexual orientation or the definition of gender. So something that we do, for example, in Hellon, when we push out recruitment briefs to our recruitment agencies, we do actually explicitly request that we want to have a diverse set of gender expressions in the customer base that we're interviewing. It's not always achieved, but it's at least an ambition that we wish to kind of embrace. From an employee side of things, again, recapping a few things, make sure that your equity, diversity, and inclusion agenda, the EDI agenda, is socialized. If you don't have one, make sure that some effort is put into it, and create a clear roadmap, because having that clarity is what will actually empower colleagues from various minorities, again, not just LGBT minority, to own parts of its execution, to be more comfortable, to be themselves. And something to keep in mind, obviously, is that if you don't have an agenda in place, one place to actually look into is the UK Equality Act of 2010. It's an online resource, fascinating piece of work there, an excellent reference point for how to be more inclusive within the workplace. It's available on the gov.uk website, and I personally refer to that Equality Act very often, even myself, to kind of make sure that I am as diverse in my approach as a designer. Again, as mentioned, keep in mind that queer practitioners of any sort of field do have a heightened sense of empathy towards other intersectionalities. We are parts of a minority, and we do know how it feels to be a minority. So even though we might not be we might not be a kind of representation of another kind of minority, we do consider ourselves, I guess, as gatekeepers of diversity. So yeah, use that to your benefit. If you have queer employees or peers, make sure that you engage with them and hear them out. And again, embrace and encourage the creation of more formalized queer communities within your companies, so that you kind of create that safe space, because that will actually make you as employers so much more attractive for potential talent, and will also increase the retention of the talent pool that you have, which, as I said, is becoming more and more tricky to maintain. This is pretty much what I wanted to cover. Obviously, we still have roughly 10 minutes left or so to cover the topic. So yeah, happy to answer any questions. I see a few in the chat. Before I start answering those questions, I wanted to also finish by saying that Hellon, as an agency, we are an advocate of inclusive design. We have actually a lot of work streams currently internally to develop a more inclusive practice of customer experience within any organization. We have been utilizing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in our practice, and we constantly push to be also socially, but also environmentally sustainable. So yeah, if you wish to hear more, feel free to reach out, andy@hellon.com. Also, that another point that I wanted to raise, as a result of this research activity that I engaged in the last year or so, one of the main findings, like I said earlier, is the element of alliance within the community. Unfortunately, one of my observations was that within the customer experience community, there wasn't really a formalized community at all. There are a lot of groups of enthusiasts of customer experience, and yes, there might be a minority there being represented, but we didn't really have like a queer themed community that really formalizes this alliance. So I established the Queer Experience Alliance this year. I think we established the alliance around February, March this year. And the idea really there is to really promote promote individuals, promote fascinating initiatives that happen out there, and also for very healthy dialogues between different organizations. So yeah, if you are an ally, if you are a member of the community, make sure, please feel free to reach out. We are still, we're looking for volunteers to kind of expand our footprint as an alliance, which is now abbreviated the QXA, Queer Experience Alliance. So yeah, feel free to reach out. But yeah, andy@hellon.com. I'll now go to questions. I'll stop sharing. So I shall read out one of the questions. A thought-provoking presentation, thanks for that. As a public sector body, we gather equality information on service users, but the ones we report on startups are women, ethnic minority, or disabled-led businesses. Of course, people can choose not to say. In your research, have you sensed a desire to report on LGBT data from agencies or communities, or the community, and a willingness from the community to accept that reporting? Very good question. I would say definitely there is now more. I know there was a moment, I would say 2, 3, maybe even 4 years ago, mainly because of the fear of coming out, a lot of people would choose to just not report what their orientation was, or what their gender identity was. But there is definitely now more of a consensus to be more vocal about it. So one of the things, like I said, we do gather gender data in our forms, all forms, regardless of their purpose. And of course, we have that option of choose not to say. So if someone doesn't want to say or is undecided, and that's also something to keep in mind, especially with gender identity, there are, before you kind of transition from being male, for example, a cisgender male to a transgender female, there is, of course, a transitional period of time that may last anything between several months to years. I know personal individuals who just don't really know yet how to identify, and they're kind of almost experimenting a bit with what identity really they refer to. So sometimes that question can be quite a difficult question to answer when you don't know. So it's good to have always that option of undecided / I do not wish to say, but there is definitely more willingness to be more vocal about our identities. And I would encourage as a government body to also gather this data and see what is the proportion of queer-led businesses as well within Scotland. That was the last question. Any further questions? I will wait maybe for 10 more seconds to see if anything comes up. But yeah, feel free to reach out to andy@hellon.com. Yeah, just got a message that no more further questions. Hopefully this was provoking. Again, feel free to reach out, andy@hellon.com. Also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if anything has come up. I'm aware that this is a quite sensitive topic, and I've noticed that every time I talk about this, people are scared to ask things that they might be in the fear of being offensive without meaning it. That's what I'm here for. I do want to kind of upskill and educate. So yeah, don't be afraid. So feel free to reach out if any questions come up. But yeah, without further ado, thank you so much everyone for listening. Hopefully I was able to provoke some thinking and some kind of getting the cogs working, and feel free to reach out. And very big thanks to Business Gateway and all the partners who have invited me for speaking in the session today. Thank you so much.